Ms. McBath. Yes, still hit it.
Thank you, Chairman Owens and Ranking Member Wilson, and thank you so much to our witnesses today for your expert testimony. I must say it's a little bit disappointing to me to see my Republican colleagues kind of double down on their commitment to preventing working families from really getting the support that they deserve. Our Republican colleagues have no problem using PPP loans and other taxpayer dollars for their own business ventures, but sing a different tune when they see nurses and teachers that are actually struggling to pay even the interest on their principal loans. There are over 122,000 real people in my district in Georgia that qualify for some sort of student debt relief, and more than 80,000 who applied for these funds or were automatically approved and are counting on them to come through to assist them in handling the increased cost of their college educations. One of the most obvious factors contributing to these rising costs and the amount of debt held by our students is the trend of decreased public investment in our higher education systems. Nowhere can we find a better example of this than in my home state of Georgia, where the average debt per borrower is the third highest in the nation at over $41,000. At the beginning of the pandemic, the University System of Georgia, also known as USG, sustained a 10% cost cut of roughly $230 million that was never restored. The state recently went even further and cut an additional $66 million from next year's budget, specifically dedicated to USG. I've met with many different university officials, and they continue to express the concerns about what these cuts mean for their ability to retain and recruit staff, serve in-state students, and avoid having to increase tuition, which they have been very clear that they do not want to be forced to do. Sonny Perdue, the former Trump administration Secretary of Agriculture and current Chancellor of USG, was open about this decision and the negative impact that it will have on families in Georgia. And I quote him, he says, "This is an incredibly disappointing outcome. It will have a significant impact on institutions and the services that students and families depend on to advance their prosperity and help Georgia succeed," end quote. USG's recent press release, which I have right here, included a table showing the direct impact that these cuts would have on state funds of our universities. And I'd like to also, if Chairman, I may enter this into the record. It shows almost a $12 million cut from the University of Georgia, an $11 million cut for Georgia Tech, and over $8 million cut for the largest public university in Georgia, Georgia State University, and a $1.6 million cut for Georgia Gwinnett College, which is actually housed in my district. These continued cuts will negatively force schools to make up the revenue elsewhere or be forced to raise prices even further for students and families. My colleagues claim that the American people are fiscally irresponsible, but those are not the Georgians that I know and that I represent. The fact of the matter for most Americans is that the only way to afford school is to take out a loan, which I'm sure many of my colleagues here in Congress have actually had to do. We tell people every day that one of the best ways to get ahead is to get an education, and then we're now punishing them for trying to partake in the very thing that we want them to be doing, obtaining the skills that are necessary and vital to move their families and our country forward. Mr. Qual, can you discuss the negative impact that decreased public investment and continued cuts to higher education budgets have on our students and our public universities?
Thank you. I appreciate learning a little more about how state budget cuts are affecting your constituents, and unfortunately, it is not an uncommon story. We have seen for decades now states cutting funding for public higher education, particularly during recessions, and not putting the money back, and that has been the single biggest factor in rising tuitions at public colleges and universities, with particularly large increases in borrowing during the Great Recession.
Thank you, and I yield.